From designer suits and luxury cars to orange jumpsuits and steel bars, Nick Reiner's world collapsed in a matter of hours. The 31-year-old who once cruised through Brentwood in a Mercedes now shuffles through the corridors of Twin Towers Correctional Facility, one of the most dangerous jails in Los Angeles County. But here's what nobody's talking about: the charges he's facing, the environment he's trapped in, and his history of addiction create a perfect storm that experts say he may not survive. This isn't speculation. Former inmates, correctional experts, and criminal psychologists who've studied cases like his all point to the same grim reality. Nick Reiner was arrested on February 8, 2025, after police responded to a 911 call from his family's Brentwood estate. When officers arrived, they found both of his parents deceased. According to the Los Angeles Police Department, Nick was taken into custody at the scene. He's been charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. His bail was set at $5 million, which he couldn't post. That means he's been sitting in Twin Towers ever since, waiting for a trial that could determine whether he spends the rest of his life behind bars. Twin Towers Correctional Facility isn't your typical county jail. Located in downtown Los Angeles, this massive complex houses approximately 3,000 inmates at any given time. It was specifically designed to handle inmates with serious mental health issues, which is why it has psychiatric units and medical facilities. But despite its specialized purpose, Twin Towers has earned a reputation as one of the harshest pretrial detention facilities in California. The Los Angeles Sheriff's Department has faced repeated lawsuits over conditions inside, with former inmates describing it as a place where violence is routine and medical care is practically non-existent. For someone like Nick, who grew up in privilege and spent most of his adult life avoiding confrontation, this environment represents a complete psychological breakdown waiting to happen. He's not in a minimum security facility with programs and rehabilitation opportunities. He's in a holding tank filled with people charged with murder, assault, robbery, and gang-related crimes. Many of these inmates have spent years in and out of the system. They know how jails work, they know the unwritten rules, and they can spot weakness instantly. Nick's cell is reportedly in one of the general population units, not segregated housing. That means he's exposed to the full jail experience, shared day rooms, communal showers, and constant interaction with other inmates. According to sources familiar with the facility, his unit houses roughly 60 to 80 men across multiple tiers. The cells themselves are small, usually about 70 square feet, designed for 2 inmates but sometimes holding more due to overcrowding. There's a metal bunk bed bolted to the wall, a stainless steel toilet and sink combination, and virtually no privacy. The walls are concrete, painted in faded institutional colors that haven't been updated in decades. There are no windows in most cells, just a narrow slot in the door where guards can look in during counts. The daily routine at Twin Towers is designed for control, not comfort. Inmates wake up around 5:30 a.m. when guards start banging on doors for head count. Breakfast arrives shortly after, delivered on plastic trays through a slot in the cell door. According to multiple accounts from former Twin Towers inmates, the food is barely edible. Breakfast might be a carton of milk, a piece of fruit that's often bruised or rotting, and something that's supposed to be scrambled eggs but looks and tastes like rubber. Lunch and dinner aren't much better: mystery meat, overcooked vegetables, stale bread, and occasionally beans or rice that have been sitting under heat lamps for hours. Nick, who allegedly struggled with substance abuse for years, is now dealing with forced sobriety in the worst possible environment. There's no gradual detox program, no medical supervision beyond the bare minimum, and certainly no therapy to address the underlying issues that led to his addiction. Former addicts who've been through county jail detox describe it as torture. The physical symptoms, sweating, shaking, nausea, insomnia, are compounded by the psychological hell of being locked in a tiny cell with nowhere to escape your own thoughts. Guards don't have time or resources to monitor every inmate going through withdrawal. You either push through it or you don't. But the physical discomfort is only part of the problem. Nick is facing charges that make him a target inside. In jail culture, there's a hierarchy of crimes, and killing your parents ranks near the bottom, right alongside child molesters and informants. Other inmates view it as a violation of a fundamental code. You don't hurt your own family. That perception, whether fair or not, puts Nick in immediate danger. He's not facing open hostility every second of every day, but he's facing something worse: constant testing. Other inmates will probe for weakness, try to see what he's made of, figure out whether he can be manipulated or exploited. According to a former Twin Towers correctional officer who spoke anonymously about conditions inside, inmates like Nick often become targets for extortion. It works like this. Someone who appears weak or out of place gets approached by more aggressive inmates who offer protection in exchange for money from the outside. They'll have Nick call his family or friends and have them deposit funds into another inmate's commissary account. If he refuses or can't pay, the consequences escalate. It might start with verbal threats, then move to theft of his commissary items, then physical intimidation, and eventually outright violence. The guards can't prevent this because they're outnumbered and can't be everywhere at once. Twin Towers operates with a guard-to-inmate ratio that's been criticized as dangerously inadequate. On any given shift, a single unit with 60 to 80 inmates might have only 2 or 3 deputies monitoring the entire floor. They're responsible for conducting counts, responding to emergencies, distributing meals, and managing movement throughout the facility. That means there are long stretches where inmates are essentially unsupervised in the day rooms or their cells. Fights break out, debts get settled, and alliances form without any intervention. By the time guards respond, the damage is already done. Nick's mental state, according to sources who've had indirect contact with the case, has reportedly deteriorated since his arrest. He's described as paranoid, withdrawn, and struggling to adapt to the constant noise and chaos. Twin Towers never sleeps. There's always someone yelling, banging on doors, arguing with guards, or having a psychiatric episode. The fluorescent lights stay on 24 hours a day in the hallways, creating a perpetual twilight that messes with your circadian rhythm. Sleep deprivation becomes chronic. You're constantly exhausted but never fully rested because you're always on alert, always waiting for the next disruption. Former inmates describe the smell inside Twin Towers as overwhelming. It's a combination of industrial cleaning products trying and failing to mask the odors of unwashed bodies, backed-up toilets, mildew growing in the ventilation systems, and food waste. The air quality is poor because the ventilation was designed decades ago and hasn't been properly maintained. In the summer months, temperatures inside the units can climb into the 90s with no air conditioning, just fans that push hot air around. In winter, the heating is inconsistent, leaving some cells freezing while others are stifling. The medical care situation is another disaster waiting to happen for Nick. Twin Towers has medical staff on site, but they're overwhelmed by the volume of inmates needing care. If you have a serious emergency, you'll eventually get treatment. But if you're dealing with chronic pain, mental health issues, or addiction-related problems, you're largely on your own. Inmates submit sick call requests by filling out forms that go into a queue. It can take days or even weeks to see a doctor or nurse. Mental health services are even more limited. Despite Twin Towers being designed as a mental health facility, the psychiatric staff can't keep up with demand. Inmates wait months for proper evaluations, and medication management is haphazard at best. Nick's case has drawn some media attention, which creates its own set of problems inside. Other inmates know who he is and why he's there. In jail, information spreads fast. Guys read newspapers, watch the news on the dayroom TV, and talk to visitors who bring updates from the outside world. When you're a high-profile case, you lose the ability to blend in and stay under the radar. Some inmates will try to befriend you just to get close to your story, hoping to sell information to tabloids or use it as leverage. Others will resent the attention you're getting and target you out of spite or jealousy. The legal reality Nick faces makes everything worse. First-degree murder charges in California carry a sentence of 25 years to life, and that's without special circumstances. If prosecutors argue there were aggravating factors, he could be looking at life without the possibility of parole. His public defender or private attorney, depending on what his family can afford, will be working on his case, but the wheels of justice turn slowly. Pretrial motions, evidence discovery, witness interviews, all of this takes months or even years. That means Nick could be sitting in Twin Towers for 12 to 18 months before his case even goes to trial. And if he's convicted, he'll be transferred to state prison, where the environment is somehow even more dangerous than county jail. California's prison system is notorious for gang activity and violence. Inmates are often pressured to align with prison gangs for protection, but joining a gang means following orders, committing violence on command, and living under constant threat of retaliation from rival groups. For someone with no street experience, no connections, and a case that marks him as an outsider, survival in state prison requires either finding a protective custody unit or learning to navigate an incredibly hostile social structure. Protective custody, known as PC, is an option for inmates who can't safely live in general population. But PC units come with their own stigma. You're housed with informants, sex offenders, and others deemed too vulnerable for mainline prison. It's safer in some ways, but it's also isolating and offers fewer programs or opportunities. The psychological toll of long-term incarceration is something most people don't understand until they experience it. Studies conducted by correctional psychologists show that extended stays in jail or prison, especially in high-stress environments like Twin Towers, lead to what's called institutionalization. Your personality changes. You become hypervigilant, distrustful, and emotionally numb as a defense mechanism. Some inmates develop PTSD from witnessing or experiencing violence. Others sink into depression, anxiety, or even psychosis. Without proper mental health treatment, these conditions worsen over time. Nick's alleged substance abuse history makes him particularly vulnerable. Addiction doesn't disappear just because you're locked up. The cravings persist, and the psychological need for escape becomes even more intense when you're trapped in a nightmare you can't wake up from. Some inmates turn to contraband drugs that circulate inside jails. Despite security measures, drugs make their way into facilities through corrupt staff, visitors, or inmates who smuggle them in during court appearances. But using drugs in jail is incredibly risky. There's no quality control, no way to know what you're actually taking, and if you overdose, medical response is slow. Plus, getting caught with contraband brings additional charges and disciplinary actions that can extend your sentence or land you in segregation. Segregation, also known as the whole or solitary confinement, is where inmates go for punishment or protective isolation. You're locked in a cell 23 hours a day with minimal human contact and nothing to do but sit with your thoughts. Studies have shown that even short stays in solitary confinement can cause severe psychological damage, including hallucinations, paranoia, and suicidal ideation. For someone already struggling mentally, segregation can be the breaking point. Yet for inmates like Nick who might not be able to handle general population, it sometimes becomes the only option for survival. The commissary system inside Twin Towers offers a small measure of comfort if you have money. Inmates can purchase snacks, hygiene products, writing materials, and other basic items through the jail store. But you need money deposited into your account from the outside, and the prices are marked up significantly. A bag of chips that costs $1 in the real world might cost $3 or $4 in commissary. For inmates without family support or financial resources, commissary is out of reach. That creates another divide inside. Those who have resources and those who don't. The have-nots often end up indebted to other inmates, borrowing items they can't pay back, which leads to exploitation and violence. Phone calls are another lifeline that many inmates depend on, but they're expensive and limited. Twin Towers uses a contract phone system that charges exorbitant rates for collect calls. A 15-minute call can cost $10 or more, and the jail takes a cut of the revenue. For families already struggling to afford legal representation and other expenses, maintaining regular phone contact becomes a financial burden. Nick's family, assuming they're still willing to support him given the charges he's facing, would need to continuously fund his phone account just to maintain communication. If that support disappears, he's completely isolated. Visits are similarly restricted and uncomfortable. Twin Towers uses video visitation for most inmates, meaning family members don't come to the jail itself but rather connect through a video terminal from a remote location. The visits are time-limited, usually 30 minutes, and the video quality is often poor with delays and disconnections. In-person visits are rare and reserved for attorney meetings or special circumstances. For someone who's already feeling disconnected from reality, the lack of genuine human contact accelerates the psychological decline. Nick's case will eventually go to trial unless he accepts a plea deal. Plea bargains are how the vast majority of criminal cases get resolved because trials are expensive, time-consuming, and risky for both sides. Prosecutors might offer a deal where Nick pleads guilty to a lesser charge in exchange for a reduced sentence. But given the severity of the charges, any plea deal would still likely involve decades in prison. If he rejects a plea and goes to trial, the outcome is uncertain. Juries are unpredictable, and if he's convicted on all charges, he could face the maximum sentence. That uncertainty creates immense stress, and inmates awaiting trial often describe it as psychological torture. You're stuck in limbo, unable to move forward with your life, constantly cycling between hope and despair. The public perception of Nick's case will also play a role in his experience inside. If media coverage paints him as a monster, other inmates will treat him accordingly. If there are details that emerge suggesting mitigating circumstances, mental illness, a history of abuse, or other factors, it might generate some sympathy. But in jail, sympathy doesn't translate to safety. Other inmates don't care about your backstory or what led you to commit your crime. They care about what you can do for them or what threat you pose. Looking at similar cases provides some insight into what Nick might face long-term. Eric and Lyle Menendez, who were convicted of killing their parents in 1989, spent years in county jail before and during their trials. They've now been in state prison for over 3 decades. Their cases became cultural touchstones, and they've had to navigate life in prison under intense public scrutiny. Other inmates who've killed family members report being ostracized, targeted, and forced into protective custody for their own safety. The pattern is consistent. These cases carry a stigma that follows you through the entire criminal justice system. The statistics on violence in Los Angeles County jails are staggering. According to data from the American Civil Liberties Union, inmate-on-inmate assaults are significantly underreported because many victims don't file grievances out of fear of retaliation. The Los Angeles Sheriff's Department has faced multiple investigations into excessive force by deputies, inadequate medical care, and failure to protect vulnerable inmates. Reform efforts have been implemented over the years, but the fundamental problems persist: overcrowding, understaffing, aging infrastructure, and a jail culture that tolerates violence as inevitable. Nick's survival, both physical and psychological, depends on factors largely outside his control. If he can afford competent legal representation, his case might be resolved more quickly or favorably. If his family continues to support him emotionally and financially, he'll have access to commissary, phone calls, and resources that make jail more bearable. If he gets placed in a unit with less violent inmates or manages to avoid conflicts, he might make it through pretrial detention without serious injury. But all of these are big ifs. The reality is that Twin Towers is a pressure cooker, and Nick walked in with every disadvantage: no street experience, a high-profile case, a history of addiction, deteriorating mental health, and charges that make him a target. The question isn't whether Nick Reiner is guilty or innocent. That's for a jury to decide. The question is whether the system he's trapped in will destroy him before he ever gets his day in court. Former inmates who've survived places like Twin Towers describe it as a test of will that changes you forever. You either adapt or you break. There's no middle ground. And for someone who, by all accounts, was already fragile before this nightmare began, the odds aren't good. So what happens next? Nick sits in his cell, counting the days until his next court appearance, trying to survive each 24-hour cycle without incident. His attorneys file motions, negotiate with prosecutors, and prepare for trial while he remains in legal and physical limbo. His family, if they're still involved, struggles with the impossible situation of loving someone accused of murdering their own relatives. And the system grinds on, indifferent to his suffering, his fear, or his deteriorating mental state. What do you think about Nick Reiner's chances of surviving this situation? Does the system need reform to protect pretrial detainees, or is this just the reality of facing serious criminal charges? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more deep dives into cases like this, subscribe so you don't miss the next one.